India called out the fact that many other countries are also still trading with Russia, including even the European Union, which has significantly cut back its imports from Russia, but is still buying a lot of liquefied natural gas that accounts for about 15% of European natural gas supplies. And the U.S., while not importing much from Russia, hasn't found a replacement for nuclear fuel. So I do think some of India's concerns are justified. And the Indians do point back that it was the last U.S. administration that put in place the price capped system, which facilitated the redirection of trade. So I do think India is caught in this crossfire of difficult bilateral trade talks and the fact that Trump wants to sound tough on Russia right now after several months, 6 months of doing nothing to pressure Russia on the economic side.
And what really, feels a bit irksome about all of this is that India and the United States have traditionally been allies and friends. So do you feel that India, by digging in, is willing to sacrifice that long-standing relationship for the sake of its economic interests and also just not wanting to be bullied?
Yeah, I think India is one of several countries that doesn't want to be bullied, and their interests are domestic. They care about the relationship with the United States. They care about the relationship with the Quad. I chatted with your colleague Shri a couple months back, and at that point it seemed more likely that there would be a deal given this political commitment. I think from the Indian perspective, though, no deal is better than a bad deal. And I think their expectation is that there will eventually be a deal. But the challenge is that the U.S. wants India to yield on market access, on agriculture, on a variety of political sensitive areas. And so that is difficult. And as I say, the timing where Trump wants to sound tough on Russia, maybe he's comfortable with acting and trying to push some oil from Russia off the market. But so far, I think it's easier to threaten than actually to take action in ways that would hurt Russia's economy.
So, I think we've fairer to say that, U.S. and India only more recently got closer under the Biden administration.
Good point.
Before that, right, I think India had more of a history of basically wanting to go its own way, this whole non-aligned sort of approach. But, Rachel, if I were to try and animate this conversation, correct me if I'm wrong or if you disagree, right? The president and the Trump administration is basically saying to India, it's like, look, guys, look over here, right? We don't like you guys getting that close to Russia. Energy, U.S. LNG, right? Arms, take a look at F-35s. But let's get to the nuts and bolts part of it if we could. The oil that India buys from Russia right now, A, is heavily discounted, B, is sort of sanctions skirting. Could they buy U.S. LNG? I guess they could. How much more expensive would it be, including extra sailing time, one? And two, in terms of U.S. arms, I mean, F-35s are state of the art, but can India or does India want to afford that?
Yeah, good point on price. So for LNG right now, with Europe buying more, with wealthier Asian countries restocking, LNG prices are very high. And for India, they would rather use their own domestic coal for power generation. Now, where oil is concerned, you're right. Russia's been getting discounted oil and oil products. They've been turning around or boosting their refining and then turning around and exporting it to other countries. The Europeans are trying to crack down on that too. The Europeans will probably end up just paying more for their diesel going into the fall when that policy comes into place. But yes, the price differential is significant, and U.S. new production of oil and gas is trending down. Every week we see lower rig counts out of the United States, and U.S. producers are becoming more efficient, yes, but that trend of lower rig counts, lower exploration, I think that is going to tend us towards lower production. Now, that's less an issue for LNG, but more of an issue for oil and oil products. And the other thing going on, let's look at the deals that the US has already struck, or the frameworks with Japan, with the EU, with South Korea. If these energy purchase agreements are really aspirational, and that's probably being kind, right? The Europeans, they're pledging to spend 3 times more on US energy imports than they've done last year. So either they're going to buy a lot more, and the US is going to have to really ramp up, or the price of those products is going to go up even higher than it's been. So I think this just doesn't quite compute, especially when you put it together at a global level.
You know, Rachel, this gets really geeky, right? But I want to try and explore this and get your thoughts. And this dates back to the Biden administration again. And I'm wondering whether or not the U.S. is ace in the hole with India. I remember back in the day during the Biden administration, one of the things they agreed on as part of this sort of getting closer thing was to allow India access to technology for GE military aircraft jet engines, right? And this sounds geeky, but you know, bear with me here. This would be the kind of technology that China would kill to get their hands on, right? Because they are just so far behind in terms of that kind of development. And it's pretty crucial to a lot of things, their aerospace program, and et cetera. So if the U.S. is dangling that, it seems to me that would be a pretty strong ace in the hole. What do you think?
I think you're right, and I think, Martin, the other thing I think you're highlighting here is that, you know, a few years ago, the U.S. policy towards saw India as critical to trying to reduce China's dominance in supply chains, whether it was in military sort of technology, whether it was in smartphone manufacturing, right? India was sort of part of Apple's exiting China strategy. It didn't fully work, and so now the Trump administration is really conflicted because they want all that production at home in the United States. So they no longer are pushing China plus one strategies to the same extent. And so that extends to consumer goods as well as extending to military ones. But I think the other thing that has India and other, you know, more recent allies, you know, questioning is all this pressure on India is coming at the same time that Trump himself is saying pretty conciliatory things about China, trying to sell more chips, trying to strike that balance. Now that partly reflects the supply chains that China controls, but it also, I think, makes it much more difficult for companies and countries around the world to think about what kind of technology transfer, you know, patterns and supply chains are going to manifest.